My name is Donna, 67 years old, and I never imagined my only son would betray me over the country house that had been in our family for generations. When Andrew coldly told me I had no right to visit anymore, I simply nodded and smiled. He had no idea what was coming next. That quiet moment would change everything between us. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Take a moment to comment below, hit that subscribe button, and join me for more stories about overcoming family challenges that test our very limits. I grew up in the rolling hills of Vermont, where the changing seasons painted our landscape in an ever-shifting palette of colors. My childhood was simple, but rich with experiences that connected me deeply to the land. My father worked at the local lumber mill, while my mother taught at the town's only elementary school. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they saved every penny they could. In 1952, their dreams came true when they purchased a modest 2-story farmhouse on 3 acres of land just outside Middlebury. I was only 8 years old when we moved in, but I remember that day as if it were yesterday. The excitement in my parents' eyes as they showed me the apple orchard with 12 gnarled trees, the small spring-fed pond where frogs sang through summer evenings, and the century-old maple trees that lined the long gravel driveway. "This is our legacy, Donna," my father told me, his calloused hand resting on my shoulder. "Someday, this will all be yours to pass down to your children." That country house became the center of our family universe. Every summer was spent picking apples and making cider in the rickety wooden press my father built. Fall brought spectacular foliage that transformed our maples into towers of gold and crimson. Winter meant sledding down the gentle slope behind the house and drinking hot chocolate by the stone fireplace my father painstakingly constructed from rocks collected from our land. Spring brought wildflowers and the tapping of maple trees for syrup, a tradition my father insisted on maintaining, even though it was labor-intensive for our small family. My teenage years were marked by weekend gatherings where neighboring families would come for barbecues under the shade of those grand maples. I had my first kiss at 16 with Tommy Benson behind the tool shed, a memory that still makes me smile, despite the years between then and now. After high school, I followed in my mother's footsteps and became a teacher. I met Robert during my second year, teaching in Burlington. He was a kind, steady man who worked as an accountant. We married in the backyard of the country house, with string lights hanging from the maple trees, and my mother's heirloom tablecloths covering the mismatched tables we'd borrowed from half the town. Robert and I settled in Burlington, about 40 minutes from my parents' place. We bought a modest home in a nice neighborhood, thinking we'd eventually have several children to fill it. Life had other plans, though. After 3 miscarriages, we were blessed with Andrew, our only child. He became the center of our world, and my parents doted on their only grandchild with unrestrained joy. Every other weekend and most holidays, we'd drive to the country house. Andrew would run wild through the orchard wade in the pond, catching tadpoles, and help his grandfather with projects around the property. My father taught him how to split wood for the fireplace, identify bird calls, and pick apples at their peak ripeness. My mother showed him how to bake her famous apple pies and tend to the perennial garden she'd nurtured for decades. When my parents passed away, my father in 2008 and my mother just 4 months later in 2009, their loss left a gaping hole in our lives. The country house, now mine, according to their will, stood as a physical reminder of their legacy. Robert encouraged me to sell it, pointing out the practical challenges of maintaining two properties. But I couldn't bring myself to part with it. The house held too many memories, too much of my history. "This is Andrew's birthright," I explained to Robert. "One day he'll bring his own family here, and the traditions will continue." Robert didn't push the issue, understanding my emotional attachment. He helped me maintain the property, driving out with me on weekends to mow the lawn, trim the apple trees, and keep the old house in good repair. Those years were peaceful with Andrew, growing into a thoughtful young man who seemed to share my love for the country property. When Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack in 2015, the country house became even more significant to me. It was there, sitting on the porch swing my father had built, that I felt closest to all those I'd loved and lost. I began spending more time there, sometimes entire weeks, finding comfort in the familiar creaks of the floorboards and the way the afternoon light filtered through the kitchen windows. I retired from teaching the following year at 62, planning to split my time between the Burlington house and the country property. I envisioned quiet days, tending the garden, hosting occasional visits from friends, and waiting for the day when Andrew would start his own family and bring children who would run through the orchard as he once had. The country house wasn't fancy by any means. The kitchen still had the 1970s cabinets my parents had installed. The bathrooms were functional but dated, and the furniture was a collection of well-loved pieces accumulated over decades. But everything was clean, well-maintained, and brimming with character and memories. I took pride in preserving it, just as my parents had left it, updating only what was absolutely necessary. I never imagined that this beloved family home would become the center of a painful betrayal that would test not just my relationship with my only son, but my own sense of self-worth and resolve. Andrew met Stephanie during his final year of graduate school, where he was pursuing a master's degree in business administration. He was 28, focused on his career, and hadn't shown much interest in serious relationships until then. When he called to tell me about Stephanie, his voice had a lightness I hadn't heard in years. "She's amazing, Mom," he said. "Smart, ambitious, and she actually laughs at my terrible jokes." I was thrilled that my son had found someone special and looked forward to meeting the woman who had captured his heart. Our first meeting was at a restaurant in Burlington, a casual dinner where Stephanie charmed me with stories of her work in marketing and her enthusiasm for Andrew's career prospects. She was undeniably beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair, immaculate makeup, and an outfit that looked straight from a designer boutique. There was something calculated about her warmth that gave me pause, but I brushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to first meeting nerves. "Andrew has told me so much about the famous country house," she said over dessert. "I can't wait to see this special place I've heard so much about." I invited them for the following weekend, eager to share our family treasure. Stephanie seemed suitably impressed as I gave her the tour, though her comments focused more on the property's potential than its current charm. "This kitchen could be amazing with some updates," she remarked, running her finger along the worn but well-maintained countertop. "And imagine this living room with a modern sectional and some proper lighting." I smiled and nodded, reminding myself that young people naturally see things differently. What I treasured as cherished history, she saw as outdated. It was normal, I told myself. Their relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, Andrew proposed with a diamond ring that seemed extravagant on his entry-level salary. When I expressed gentle concern about the expense, he brushed it off. Stephanie deserves the best mom. Her family has certain expectations. It was the first time he'd mentioned her family having expectations. And something about the way he said it bothered me. Andrew had always been sensible about money, a trait Robert and I had worked hard to instill. I soon learned that Stephanie came from a large, tight-knit family. She had 3 sisters, all married with children, and her parents, Marshall and Vivian, were the type who believed family should gather frequently and lavishly. Their gatherings were catered affairs with matching tableware and elaborate decorations, a far cry from the potluck-style, everyone-pitch-in events my family had always enjoyed. When Andrew and Stephanie announced their engagement, they immediately began planning a wedding that seemed to grow more elaborate with each discussion. I offered the country house as a venue, thinking it would be meaningful to have this new chapter of our family history begin in the place that held so much of our past. "It's perfect," Stephanie exclaimed, though I noticed her eyes calculating rather than nostalgic. "We'll need to make some adjustments, of course, but the property has wonderful potential." Those adjustments turned out to be extensive and expensive. Professional landscapers were brought in to manicure the natural beauty of the grounds. The kitchen was temporarily upgraded with rented commercial equipment. Rental companies delivered tables, chairs, tents, and a dance floor that covered much of the backyard I'd played in as a child. I contributed significantly to the wedding costs, wanting to honor Robert's memory by giving our only son the celebration he deserved. The event was beautiful. I had to admit, though it felt more like a production than a heartfelt ceremony. Nearly 200 guests attended, most from Stephanie's side, many of whom I met for the first time that day. During the reception, I overheard Stephanie's mother, Vivian, commenting to one of her friends, "The property has such potential. Stephanie has wonderful plans for it. A shame it's been left so rustic all these years." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on celebrating Andrew's happiness. After the wedding, I expected life to return to normal, with occasional visits from the newlyweds to the country house. Instead, something unexpected began to happen. Stephanie's family started showing up at the country house on weekends, sometimes calling with just hours of notice to inform me they would be dropping by. The first few times, I welcomed them, warmly preparing food and making sure the guest rooms were comfortable. But the visits increased in frequency and length. Stephanie's sisters would bring their children and husbands for entire weekends. Her parents began staying for 3 or 4 days at a stretch. They would rearrange furniture to accommodate their large groups, use my kitchen to prepare elaborate meals, leaving considerable cleanup, and treat the property as their own vacation retreat. When I gently mentioned to Andrew that some notice would be appreciated before such large groups arrived, his response surprised me. "They're family now, Mom. The house is plenty big enough for everyone. It's good to see it being used and appreciated." The tone in his voice suggested I was being selfish for wanting advance notice about guests in my own home. I backed off, not wanting to create tension in his new marriage. Then, I began noticing small changes to the property. The antique coffee table that had been my grandmother's was replaced with a modern glass one. The vintage curtains in the dining room disappeared, replaced by sleek blinds. The wall where generations of my family had marked children's heights with pencil was painted over. When I asked about these changes, Stephanie was always ready with a plausible explanation. The movers damaged the coffee table when they were bringing in the sofa for my parents' visit. We had to replace it quickly. The old curtains had so much dust, I was worried about my nephew's allergies. The blinds are much more hygienic. The paint was peeling on that wall. We thought it needed refreshing. Did it have something important on it? Each explanation was delivered with wide-eyed innocence that made me feel unreasonable for questioning the changes. And Andrew, when I tried to discuss my concerns with him, became increasingly defensive. Stephanie is trying to help Mom. This place could use some updating. Dad would have understood that. The invocation of Robert's approval felt like a low blow. My late husband had indeed been practical about home improvements, but he had also deeply respected the sentimental value of family treasures. As months passed, the boundaries between my ownership and Stephanie's family's use of the property grew increasingly blurred. They began storing their own belongings in closets in the basement. One of Stephanie's sisters left exercise equipment in what had been my father's study. Their children's toys accumulated in corners of rooms and under beds. I felt like a guest in my own family home, increasingly unwelcome and unnecessary. The first major confrontation came on a crisp autumn day in October. I had been feeling disconnected from my beloved country house, having been subtly discouraged from visiting when Stephanie's family was there. Determined to reconnect with the property, I drove out, without calling first, something I'd never needed to do at my own home. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, I noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked haphazardly on the lawn, leaving tire marks in the grass my father had always been so careful to protect. Inside, I found Stephanie's parents supervising two workmen who were completely renovating the guest bedroom that had once belonged to my parents. The original hardwood floors were covered with drop cloths, the walls half-painted a stark white that erased the warm beige my mother had carefully selected. The antique four-poster bed that had been in our family for 3 generations was nowhere to be seen. "Donna!" Vivian exclaimed, clearly startled by my appearance. "We weren't expecting you today." I stood in the doorway, struggling to find words, as I took in the transformation of my parents' sacred space. "What's happening here?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just some much-needed updates," Marshall replied with forced cheerfulness. That old bed was terribly uncomfortable for our backs, and the room was so dark and dated. "Did Andrew approve this?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course," Vivian said smoothly. "He told us to make ourselves at home. This will be our room when we visit, so it made sense to adjust it to our needs." "This is my house," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Major renovations should be discussed with me first." Marshall's expression hardened. "Andrew said it wouldn't be a problem. He understands that family needs to be accommodated." Before I could respond, I heard the front door open and Andrew's voice calling out. He appeared behind me, surprise and then wariness crossing his face as he assessed the situation. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming today," he said, his tone suggesting I was the one who had done something wrong. "I didn't realize I needed permission to visit my own home," I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Andrew pulled me into the hallway, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Stephanie's parents are doing us a favor, Mom. They're paying for these renovations themselves. The place needs updating, and they have great taste." "That's not the point, Andrew. This is my house, my parents' bedroom. These are decisions I should be part of." His face flushed with anger, something I rarely saw directed at me. "It's a family house, Mom. Stephanie is my wife. Her family is our family now. You need to be more flexible." "Flexible? They're erasing our family history without even consulting me. They're creating new family history," he shot back. "You can't live in the past forever. Dad would want the house to evolve with the family. the invocation of Robert's wishes, felt like a physical blow. I stared at my son, barely recognizing the person before me. "I think I should go," I said, finally turning toward the stairs. "That's probably best," Andrew agreed coldly. "I'll call you once things calm down." The drive back to Burlington was a blur of tears and disbelief. I kept replaying Andrew's words, trying to understand how my gentle, considerate son had become someone who would dismiss my feelings so callously. By the time I reached my Burlington home, I felt hollowed out, as if something essential had been scraped from inside me. I called my closest friend Janet, who had known Andrew since he was a baby. We met for coffee the next day, and I poured out the whole painful story. "You need to stand your ground, Donna," Janet said firmly after listening. "That house is legally yours. If you don't establish clear boundaries now, you'll lose everything that matters to you about the place." She was right, of course. After days of agonizing, I texted Andrew suggesting a family meeting to discuss the country house and establish some guidelines that would work for everyone. His response was tepid, but he agreed to gather at my Burlington home the following weekend. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Stephanie arrived with a notebook full of improvement ideas for the country house. Her parents had sent along a list of dates they planned to use the property over the next 6 months, presented as decisions already made rather than requests. When I tried to suggest that major changes to the property should require my approval first, Andrew's reaction was immediate and harsh. "You're being selfish, Mom. This territorial behavior isn't like you." "It's not territorial to want a say in what happens to my own property," I countered. Stephanie's expression was a mixture of pity and disdain. "The house has so much potential, Donna. It's stuck in the past. Those outdated fixtures, the old-fashioned furniture. It could be so much more with some vision." "That outdated furniture tells our family's story," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Every piece has meaning and history." "History is for museums," Stephanie replied with a dismissive wave. "Homes are for living in the present." The conversation deteriorated from there. By the end, nothing had been resolved except my growing certainty that I was fighting a losing battle for my own property. The following week, I drove out to the country house, determined to at least retrieve some of the family heirlooms I was most concerned about. To my horror, I discovered that the antique secretary desk that had belonged to my grandmother, where I'd written countless letters, and where Andrew had done his homework during visits, had been moved to the attic. In its place stood a modern glass computer desk. The hallway was lined with framed professional photographs of Stephanie's family events, while the collection of family photos, chronicling 4 generations of my family, had been relegated to a box in the closet. The entire house felt like it was being systematically stripped of my family's presence and replaced with Stephanie's vision. I spent the afternoon rescuing what heirlooms I could find and loading them carefully into my car. As I worked, the painful realization settled over me. I was losing not just physical control of the property, but its soul. The country house that had been my emotional anchor throughout my life was being transformed into something unrecognizable, and my own son was not only allowing it, but encouraging it. As autumn deepened into winter, I made plans to spend 2 weeks at the country house during peak foliage season, a tradition I'd maintained since childhood. I called Andrew to inform him of my plans, and while he seemed hesitant, he didn't outright object. When I arrived at the property, I was stunned to find Stephanie's parents luxury SUV in the driveway. Entering the house, I discovered they had apparently moved in semi-permanently. The living room was strewn with their belongings. The kitchen had been partially remodeled with new appliances I'd never seen before. The dining room table, where my family had gathered for countless meals, was gone, replaced by a glass monstrosity that seated 12. "Donna!" Vivian exclaimed when she saw me standing in the doorway, suitcase still in hand. "We weren't expecting you." "I told Andrew I'd be staying for 2 weeks," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. "For the fall colors. It's a tradition." Marshall emerged from the kitchen, coffee cup in hand. "Andrew mentioned something about that, but we assumed you'd changed your mind since you didn't confirm." I hadn't known I needed to confirm plans for my own house. "How long have you been staying here?" I asked. Vivian and Marshall exchanged glances. "About a month now," Marshall admitted. "Our condo is being renovated, and Andrew said we could stay as long as we wanted." "A month?" I echoed, disbelieving. "And how much longer do you plan to be here?" "The renovations should be done by Christmas," Vivian said. "But we're enjoying it so much here, we might extend. The grandkids love visiting on weekends." My mind was reeling. "I'll need to stay in my bedroom," I said firmly. "I've brought work with me that requires space and quiet." Another uncomfortable exchange of glances between them. "Well, that might be a problem," Marshall began. "We've been using the master bedroom since it has the ensuite bathroom. Our arthritis makes it difficult to manage stairs to the hall bath." "I see," I said coldly. "And where did you expect me to sleep in my own home?" "The sofa in the study pulls out," Vivian offered. "It's quite comfortable. Stephanie's sister used it last weekend." Wordlessly, I turned and walked up the stairs to what had always been my bedroom, the one I had shared with Robert during our visits, the one that had been my parents' before that. I pushed open the door and froze. The room was unrecognizable. My cherry wood bedroom set had been replaced with modern white furniture. The handmade quilt that had covered the bed for decades was gone. Even the color of the walls had been changed from the soft blue I loved to a stark, fashionable gray. On the dresser stood framed photos of Stephanie's family, including a large wedding portrait of her sister. I sat heavily on the unfamiliar bed, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just redecorating. This was erasure. My family's presence was being systematically removed from the house we had loved and maintained for generations. With shaking hands, I called Andrew. "Did you tell your in-laws they could live in my house indefinitely?" I demanded when he answered. There was a pause before he responded. "They needed a place to stay, Mom. Their condo renovation is taking longer than expected." "And you didn't think to ask me?" "This is my house, Andrew. My home. It's the family home." He corrected, his tone cooling. "They're family now. They've taken over my bedroom. They've changed everything. There are no photos of our family anywhere. It's like we never existed here." "You're overreacting," Andrew dismissed. "They've made some updates, that's all. The place needed refreshing." "Refreshing? They've erased us from this house. Your grandparents built this place. Your father and I maintained it for you. And now you're letting strangers remake it in their image." "They're not strangers, Mom. They're my wife's parents. And it's their house now, too. You need to accept that." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "What do you mean, their house? I own this property. It belongs to me." "Family property belongs to the family," Andrew said firmly. "And my family includes Stephanie and her parents now." I ended the call, too upset to continue the conversation. As I sat in the unfamiliar bedroom that had once been my sanctuary, I could hear Vivian on the phone downstairs, presumably talking to Stephanie. "She's being difficult," Vivian's voice drifted up. I don't understand why she's so attached to all this outdated stuff. The place is so much nicer now. I began to unpack my suitcase, determined to at least reclaim my bedroom for the 2 weeks I'd planned to stay. As I was hanging clothes in the closet, I discovered most of it was filled with Vivian and Marshall's belongings. Only a small section remained available. The next morning, I rose early to enjoy coffee on the porch, another tradition I cherished. I found Marshall already there talking loudly on his phone about business matters. When I attempted to sit in my usual spot, he gave me an annoyed glance and continued his conversation as if I were intruding. Throughout the day, similar small indignities accumulated. Vivian rearranged the breakfast I'd set out for myself to make room for her elaborate spread. When I tried to work at the dining table, Marshall set up his laptop directly across from me, conducting video calls without headphones. Every attempt I made to occupy my own space was met with subtle resistance. That evening, I overheard a conversation that broke my heart completely. I was returning from a walk around the property when I heard Vivian speaking to someone on the phone in the kitchen. "The old lady needs to let go," she was saying, not realizing I could hear. "I've told Stephanie they need to discuss transferring the deed. It's ridiculous for her to keep control when she barely uses the place. We're here more than she is now." I retreated silently, went to the guest room where I was staying, and packed my things. I left a brief note saying I'd decided to return to Burlington and would be in touch about future arrangements for the property. The drive home was a blur of tears and heartbreak. The country house had been my emotional anchor, the physical embodiment of my family's history and love. Now it felt like it had been stolen from under me with my own son's blessing. Back in Burlington, I called Janet, who came over immediately with a bottle of wine and a sympathetic ear. "You need to talk to a lawyer," she advised after hearing the full story. "That house is legally yours. They can't just take it over and push you out." "But it's my son," I said, wiping away tears. "How did it come to this?" "Stephanie has clearly been manipulating the situation," Janet said firmly. "And Andrew is allowing it, maybe even encouraging it. You need to protect yourself and your property." As painful as it was to admit, I knew she was right. The next day, I made an appointment with a real estate attorney to discuss my options. The situation reached a breaking point as Thanksgiving approached. I had always hosted Thanksgiving at the country house, continuing my mother's traditions with her recipes and special touches. When I called Andrew to discuss plans, his response left me speechless. "Actually, Mom, we've decided to host Thanksgiving at the country house ourselves this year," he said, his tone suggesting this was a perfectly reasonable announcement. "Stephanie's parents, sisters, and their families will all be there. It's more practical, since there are more of them than just you." "I see," I managed to reply. "And will I be welcome at this Thanksgiving in my own home?" There was an uncomfortable pause. "Well, that's the thing. With all of Stephanie's family coming, we're already at capacity for sleeping arrangements, and Stephanie thought it might be awkward, given the tension lately." "You're uninviting me from Thanksgiving in my own house?" I asked incredulously. "We can do something the weekend after," he offered as if this were a reasonable compromise. "Just the three of us in Burlington." I hung up without responding, too stunned and hurt to formulate words. After sitting in shocked silence for nearly an hour, I made a decision. I would confront Andrew and Stephanie in person, one final attempt to make them understand the magnitude of what they were doing. I drove to their Burlington townhouse the next evening unannounced. Stephanie answered the door, her smile faltering when she saw me. "Donna, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, stepping past her into their living room. "Is Andrew home?" "He's on his way." she said, checking her watch. "He should be here any minute." We sat in uncomfortable silence until Andrew arrived, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he saw me. "Mom, is everything okay?" "No, Andrew, everything is not okay," I said, my voice remarkably steady, despite the turmoil inside me. "I've come to understand exactly what's happening with the country house, and we need to talk about it. If this is about Thanksgiving, we've already explained the situation," Stephanie began. "This is about far more than Thanksgiving," I interrupted. "This is about the systematic takeover of my property. The home that my parents built, that your father and I maintained, that has been in our family for generations." Andrew's face flushed with anger. "You're being dramatic. No one is taking anything over. Your in-laws have been living there for months. They've redecorated, removed family heirlooms, erased our history. And now, I'm not even welcome for our family's traditional holiday. The house needs to evolve with the family," Andrew insisted. "Stephanie's family is part of our family now. That doesn't mean they get to erase our family's existence. That doesn't mean they get to take over a property that legally belongs to me." The argument escalated, with Stephanie jumping in to defend her parents' actions as improvements and modernizations. Andrew became increasingly agitated as I stood my ground. Finally, in a burst of frustration, he shouted the words that would forever change our relationship. "It's theirs now. You have no rights to go there. You need to accept that the house belongs to the whole family. Now, not just you." The room fell silent after his outburst. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The loving boy I had raised had been replaced by someone who would betray his own mother for his wife's family's comfort. Instead of arguing further, I simply nodded and smiled. The calm response seemed to confuse Andrew, who had clearly expected more resistance. "We'll talk another time," I said quietly, gathering my purse, "when emotions aren't so high." As I drove home, a strange sense of clarity descended. The country house had been the heart of my family's legacy, but it had now become the center of a painful betrayal. The property wasn't worth losing my relationship with my son, but I also couldn't allow myself to be erased and disrespected. The next morning, I met with the real estate attorney I had consulted earlier. I brought all the documentation related to the country house, including the deed that was solely in my name, the will from my parents, and tax records showing I had paid all property taxes since inheritance. "They have absolutely no legal claim to your property," the attorney confirmed after reviewing the documents, "unless you've signed something giving them ownership or usage rights." "I haven't," I assured him. "Has your son been asking you to sign any documents recently? Even something that seemed routine or administrative?" I thought back to the stack of papers Andrew had brought over a few months earlier, claiming they were just updates to the family trust that Robert and I had established. I'd told him I wanted to review them carefully before signing, and he had seemed unusually annoyed by the delay. "He might have been trying to," I admitted, "but I haven't signed anything." "Good," the attorney said firmly, "because based on what you're describing, it sounds like they're attempting to establish adverse possession or get you to transfer partial ownership without fully understanding what you're signing." As we discussed my options, I realized that I needed to take decisive action. The country house was legally mine, and while I had always intended for it to pass to Andrew, eventually I could not allow his wife's family to steamroll over me and erase my family's legacy. With the attorney's guidance, I developed a plan to reclaim what was rightfully mine. After the confrontation with Andrew, and my meeting with the attorney, I approached the situation with a new sense of purpose and clarity. The time for passive acceptance was over. I needed to act decisively to protect what was legally and emotionally mine. My first step was to gather all documentation proving my sole ownership of the country house. The attorney helped me organize these records chronologically, creating a comprehensive file that established my clear legal right to the property. Next, I contacted a locksmith and scheduled an appointment for when I knew Stephanie's parents would be away. They had mentioned at our last uncomfortable encounter that they would be attending a family wedding out of state the following weekend. On a crisp Saturday morning, I arrived at the country house with the locksmith. As he changed all the exterior locks, I walked through each room, cataloging the changes and making notes of where my family heirlooms had been relocated or removed entirely. The systematic erasure of my family's presence was even more extensive than I had realized. The antique china cabinet that had displayed my grandmother's wedding dishes was gone, replaced by a modern entertainment center. My father's handcrafted bookshelf had been painted a glossy white, its character diminished. Family photos had been removed from walls and surfaces, replaced by generic artwork or pictures of Stephanie's family. After the locksmith finished, I contacted a security company. By the end of the day, a new alarm system had been installed with codes known only to me. I also had property boundary markers placed clearly delineating the edges of my 3 acres. I spent the next 2 days reclaiming spaces within the house. I didn't undo all of Stephanie's family's changes, recognizing that would only escalate tensions. Instead, I focused on restoring balance. I retrieved family photos from boxes in the attic and hallway closets, arranging them alongside the photos of Stephanie's family, rather than removing the latter. I recovered heirlooms that had been relegated to storage and placed them in appropriate locations throughout the house. In my parents' former bedroom, which Stephanie's parents had completely redecorated, I made one significant change. I hung a large photograph of my parents on their wedding day above the bed, a gentle but firm reminder of whose house this truly was. Throughout this process, I consulted with a family therapist who specialized in intergenerational conflicts. Dr. Melissa Thompson helped me frame my actions not as retaliation, but as healthy boundary setting. "You're not being vindictive," she assured me. "You're establishing necessary boundaries that should have been in place from the beginning. This isn't about punishing your son or his in-laws. It's about restoring balance and respect." With her guidance, I drafted a clear, firm letter outlining my expectations for the use of the country house going forward. The property would remain available for family gatherings, but with advance notice and my approval. Changes to the property would require my consent. Family heirlooms were not to be removed or altered without discussion. Most importantly, my role as the legal owner of the property would be acknowledged and respected. On Sunday evening, as expected, my phone rang. Andrew's name flashed on the screen. "Mom," he began without preamble when I answered. "Stephanie's parents can't get into the house. Did you change the locks?" "Yes, I did," I replied calmly. "As the legal owner of the property, I've made some necessary security upgrades." "You can't do that," he sputtered. "Their belongings are inside. I'm aware. They're welcome to contact me directly to arrange a time to collect their things." "This is completely unacceptable," Andrew said, his voice rising. "I'm coming over there right now with a locksmith." "That would be breaking and entering," I informed him evenly. "The property is legally mine, as confirmed by my attorney. Any attempt to enter without permission would be trespassing. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You got an attorney?" he finally asked, his tone incredulous. "I did." And he confirmed what I already knew. The country house belongs solely to me. I have never signed any document transferring ownership or granting permanent residency rights to anyone else. This is about family, not legal technicalities, Andrew argued, though with less conviction. Family works both ways, Andrew. Respect works both ways. For months now, your wife's family has been systematically erasing our family's presence from the house my parents built. They've been living there without my permission, making changes without my consent. And recently, you actually uninvited me from Thanksgiving in my own home. Mom, you're being unreasonable. Stephanie's parents needed a place to stay. There are hotels. There are rental properties. There's your house, I pointed out. They chose my house because it was convenient and free, and because you gave them permission you had no right to give. Andrew's next words revealed just how manipulated he had been. We were going to surprise you with all the improvements. They've invested thousands in updating the place. Changes I never asked for or wanted, I replied. Changes that erased your grandparents' legacy and your father's contributions. Changes that turned a beloved family home into something unrecognizable. The conversation continued in circles, with Andrew alternatively pleading threatening single action, which his own lawyer quickly discouraged after reviewing the facts and attempting to make me feel guilty for dividing the family. Throughout it all, I remained calm and firm. The country house was mine. I was willing to share it appropriately, but I would not be pushed out or erased from my own property. After several days of tense phone calls and text exchanges, including some directly from Stephanie's parents that ranged from apologetic to accusatory, Andrew finally agreed to meet face-to-face to resolve the situation. But not just us, he insisted. Stephanie and her parents should be there too, since this affects them. I agree, I replied, surprising him. This is a family matter, and all involved parties should be present. I suggested meeting at a neutral location, a private room at a local restaurant I had reserved. The stage was set for what I hoped would be a final resolution. The meeting at Harvest Table Restaurant felt like the culmination of months of building tension. I arrived early, arranging the documents I'd brought in neat stacks before me. The private dining room offered a quiet, neutral space for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. Andrew arrived with Stephanie and her parents, all wearing expressions ranging from defiant to nervous. Marshall looked particularly uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze as they took seats across the table. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I think it's important we address the situation with the country house directly and honestly. There wouldn't be a situation if you hadn't changed the locks, Stephanie interjected immediately. I took a deep breath, determined to maintain my composure. The locks are just a symptom of the real issue. The fundamental problem is that my property, my family home, has been gradually taken over without my consent. We've been improving it, Marshall countered. Those updates have increased its value considerably. That assumes I wanted those changes, or that increased property value was my priority, I replied. That house has been in my family for 3 generations. Its value to me isn't monetary. It's the memories, the history, the connection to my parents and grandparents. Times change, Donna, Vivian said with a dismissive wave. You can't expect everything to stay frozen in the past. I don't expect that. What I do expect is respect for my ownership and my family's legacy. I placed the deed to the property on the table along with my parents' will, leaving it solely to me. Legally, the country house belongs to me alone. I've never signed any document transferring ownership or granting permanent residence rights to anyone else. Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, we're not disputing the legal technicalities. This is about family. I agree completely, I said, surprising him. This is about family, which is why I've been so hurt by the systematic erasure of our family history from that house. I produced photographs showing the before and after of rooms that had been completely redecorated family heirlooms, that had been relegated to the attic, and the removal of generations of family photos. This isn't updating. This is replacing. This is erasing. Stephanie's parents had the grace to look somewhat abashed as they viewed the evidence of their overreach. Andrew looked genuinely shocked at some of the changes, suggesting he hadn't been fully aware of the extent of the transformation. I'm not here to assign blame, I continued. I'm here to establish clear boundaries moving forward. I love this property and want it to remain in our family for generations to come. But that means respecting its history while creating its future. I presented them with the document my attorney had helped prepare, outlining my non-negotiable boundaries for use of the property. The country house will remain available for family gatherings and occasional stays with advance notice and my approval. No structural or significant decorative changes will be made without my explicit consent. Family heirlooms will be respected and preserved. Marshall began to protest, but I held up my hand. These aren't unreasonable demands. They're basic courtesies that should have been observed from the beginning. I'm not excluding anyone from the property. I'm simply establishing clear guidelines for its use and care. And if we don't agree, Stephanie challenged, though, with less confidence than before, then the property will remain locked and unavailable, except when I'm personally present. I stated simply, as the legal owner, that's entirely my prerogative. Andrew's face had grown increasingly troubled throughout the meeting. He looked from me to Stephanie and her parents, seeming to truly see the situation clearly for the first time. Mom's right, he said, finally surprising everyone. We've overstepped. The house belongs to her, and we should have respected her wishes from the beginning. Stephanie turned to him, clearly prepared to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. The rest of the meeting involved negotiating specifics. Stephanie's parents would remove their belongings within 2 weeks and find alternative accommodation. The personal items of our family that had been stored away would be properly restored. Future visits would be coordinated with me in advance with reasonable notice. By the end of the 2-hour discussion, we had reached an uneasy truce. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start toward reestablishing appropriate boundaries and mutual respect. As we prepared to leave, Andrew asked to speak with me privately. Stephanie looked unhappy, but left with her parents, agreeing to wait in the car. I owe you an apology, Mom, Andrew said once we were alone. I got caught up in trying to please Stephanie and her family, and I lost sight of what that house really means to our family. His words were a balm to my wounded heart, though I knew the path to true reconciliation would be long. It's been in our family for generations, Andrew. Someday, it will be yours, and then your children's. But its value isn't just in the property itself. It's in the history and memories it holds. He nodded, genuinely contrite. I understand that now, and I'll make sure Stephanie understands too. In the weeks that followed, I reconnected with the country house on my own terms. I spent weekends there restoring personal touches and family mementos. I polished the dining table where 4 generations had shared meals. I rehung family photos alongside newer ones of Andrew and Stephanie. I reclaimed my bedroom, returning it to a space that honored both past and present. The relationship with Andrew remained strained, but we were communicating. He visited alone several times, helping me with projects around the property, as he had done with his father years before. Each visit seemed to remind him of his connection to the place and its importance in our family story. Stephanie remained distant, clearly resentful of what she perceived as her plans being thwarted. Her parents found a rental property nearby and eventually purchased a small vacation home of their own. They were cordial when our paths crossed, but made no attempts to visit the country house. The distance with Andrew was painful, but I refused to enable disrespect to preserve an artificial peace. Setting boundaries had cost me in the short term, but preserved what mattered most in the long run. Gradually, over months of careful rebuilding, Andrew began to recognize how he had betrayed my trust. The first genuine apology came during a quiet evening on the porch as we watched the sunset paint the maple trees in gold and crimson. "I lost myself for a while there," he admitted. "Got caught between wanting to please Stephanie and honoring our family. I made the wrong choice, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you." My forgiveness was cautious, but genuine. We were beginning to find our way back to each other, setting healthier boundaries that allowed for both respect and love. An unexpected blessing emerged from this difficult period. My nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, had watched the drama unfold from a respectful distance. Now, with Stephanie's family's constant presence reduced, Linda Henderson began stopping by with fresh-baked goods or to invite me for coffee. Her husband Tom helped with repairs. I couldn't manage alone, refusing payment and saying simply, "That's what neighbors do." Their teenage grandchildren showed interest in the history of the property, listening intently as I shared stories of my childhood there. These new friends appreciated the character and history of my home, seeing value in the very things Stephanie had dismissed as outdated. They became regular visitors, bringing warmth and new memories to blend with the old. Andrew and Stephanie eventually began a slow journey toward understanding proper boundaries. Their visits became more respectful, with advance notice and fewer demands for changes. Stephanie never fully embraced the property's history, but learned to tolerate and occasionally appreciate its charm. The country house took on new meaning for me through this ordeal. What had begun as a symbol of family continuity became a testament to my personal strength and resilience. I had stood firm when it would have been easier to capitulate, protecting not just a physical property, but the values and history it represented. The experience taught me that family love must be balanced with self-respect, that boundaries aren't selfish, but essential, that preserving our past doesn't prevent us from embracing the future, it enriches it. As I sit on the porch swing my father built, watching another Vermont sunset paint the sky in breathtaking colors, I feel a deep sense of peace. The house stands, as it has for generations, bearing the marks of those who loved it, changed it, fought over it, and ultimately respected it. I learned that sometimes the strongest response to a betrayal isn't anger or retaliation, but simply standing firm in your truth with dignity. When Andrew told me I had no rights to my own home, my quiet nod and smile weren't surrender. They were the calm before a storm of self-advocacy that ultimately restored balance and respect. This country house will continue to evolve with future generations as it should. But now it will do so with an understanding that honoring the past and embracing the future aren't mutually exclusive. Both can coexist in a home built on respect, boundaries, and love. I wonder about your own experiences with family properties or heirlooms. Have you ever had to stand up for your rights within your family? How did you balance love with self-respect? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my journey resonated with you. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-love that ultimately benefits everyone involved. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength and courage in your own family journeys.